Now, singer David, spelled d4vd, has officially been arrested in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a case that's raised serious questions from the very beginning, because Celeste was found inside the front trunk of a Tesla, a vehicle that was reportedly registered to David himself. And with this arrest, the story has now entered an entirely new phase. Now, most people remember where this all started. On September 8, 2025, unidentified human remains believed at the time to be a young female were discovered inside the front trunk of a Tesla at an impound lot in Los Angeles, California. The car had been towed to a Hollywood impound lot where staff eventually noticed a strong odor coming from the vehicle, and after opening the front trunk, they made a disturbing discovery. Authorities were immediately called to the scene, and according to the court filings tied to the investigation, officers found human remains inside bags placed in the trunk. Due to the condition of those remains, it was clear the situation was serious and would require a thorough forensic investigation. And as the investigation unfolded, it was revealed that the vehicle was linked to a David Burke, professionally known as David. It was one of several vehicles linked to the singer. David was a young artist who at the time was building serious momentum in the music industry and was even in the middle of a tour, which he would later cancel as the situation began to unfold. Now, at the time, it wasn't immediately known who the body belonged to, but sometime later, the medical examiner officially identified the victim as Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Celeste was discovered just one day after her 15th birthday, meaning she was only 14 when she died. And based on early reports, it was believed that her body had been inside that vehicle for some time before being discovered. Only hours after the discovery, the LAPD executed a search warrant at a home in the Hollywood Hills area, where David had reportedly been staying. During that search, law enforcement seized surveillance footage from the property, collecting recordings from multiple security cameras in and around the home. From that point on, the investigation intensified. Authorities began speaking with witnesses, collecting evidence, and working to piece together exactly what happened. And for months, there were a lot of questions, way more questions than answers, because naturally people were asking, how did this happen? How did all this connect back to David, a rising artist, someone operating in the mainstream world of music, now somehow linked to the murder of a 14-year-old girl? Now fast forward to today, nearly 7 months later, it appears investigators believe they've gathered enough evidence to make an arrest. It has now officially been confirmed that David has been arrested in connection with this case. So let's break down what we actually know so far. Now, according to the authorities, this arrest wasn't random. It was based on evidence and probable cause that was developed over time. And that part is important because this wasn't something that happened overnight. This was an ongoing investigation, something that's been building for months. But at the same time, it's also important to understand what this doesn't mean. This is not an indictment yet, meaning right now this is still part of an ongoing investigation. The legal process is still unfolding and we haven't even seen the full case yet. However, the authorities did move forward with an arrest. And according to law enforcement, they've now put together a full case, one that's being presented to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for review on Monday. That review will be handled by the Major Crime Division, the team that will ultimately determine whether this case moves forward with formal charges. And at this point, there are a few key questions that naturally come up. How strong is this case? What specific evidence do they have? And what exactly led investigators to this point? That we don't fully know yet. However, with this arrest, a few key things have now been confirmed. Number one, David is currently being held without bail, according to police. And that alone signals that the authorities are taking this extremely seriously. Because in cases like this, bail isn't just about money. It's about making sure the person shows up to court, protecting the integrity of the investigation, and in some situations, making sure there's no contact with potential witnesses. And for this case specifically, we already know that investigators have spoken to multiple people, conducted a bunch of interviews, and gathered witness testimonies along the way. And when you factor in that someone in his position would have access to significant resources, that can also become a consideration in situations like this. Again, it doesn't determine guilt, but it does tell you how serious this situation is being handled by the authorities at this stage. And this is where things start to get a little more complex, because one of the biggest reasons this case appears to have taken months to develop comes down to a single question investigators needed to answer. How did Celeste Rivas Hernandez actually die? Now, this has been a major point of contention in the case, because we do know that when 14-year-old Celeste was discovered, her remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, and that alone created a significant challenge for the medical examiner's office. Because without being able to clearly determine the exact cause of death early on, it becomes much harder for investigators to officially classify the case and move forward with certainty. Now, at the same time, of course, given the circumstances in which she was found, there are going to be immediate assumptions made. That's natural, right? I mean, just think about how Celeste was found, right? But from an investigative standpoint, assumptions aren't enough. Everything still has to be proven clearly and definitely. And in this case, a major part of that process came down to one thing: determining the exact cause of death. And now, after months of analysis, investigators are saying they believe they've reached that conclusion. But here's the thing: authorities still haven't fully revealed how they reached that conclusion or what specific evidence led them here. And that raises even more questions. What changed? What did investigators find? We do know the condition Celeste was found in was extremely disturbing, and due to that condition, investigators initially faced serious challenges determining exactly how she died. At one point, details were even limited from the public, with authorities making it clear that releasing too much information could jeopardize the investigation and potentially impact witness testimony. But that decision didn't go without criticism. In fact, the chief medical examiner publicly pushed back, questioning whether limiting that information would actually help move the case forward. So for a long time, this case was being built quietly behind the scenes, with much of the information kept tightly and controlled. And now with this arrest, it suggests that investigators believe they've finally reached a point where they can move forward. Now, David actually has 3 different attorneys representing him in this case, and they made a statement about the arrest and said the following: "Let us be clear, the actual evidence in this case will show that David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and he was not the cause of her death. There has been no indictment returned by any grand jury in this case and no criminal complaint filed. David has only been detained under suspicion. We will vigorously defend David's innocence." We still don't know exactly what evidence authorities have, but what we do know is this: authorities believe it's enough to take action. And throughout all of this, by the way, David has remained completely silent. He's largely disappeared from social media and hasn't been publicly active in the way fans were used to seeing him. And behind the scenes, things appear to have been extremely uncertain, because while his public presence went quiet, the case didn't. Investigators were continuing to build it piece by piece, taking their time to understand exactly what happened. Now, from the outside looking in, it might feel like this took too long, and honestly, part of me is like, damn, why did it take this long, right? Like, authorities should have reached a conclusion earlier. But at the same time, cases like this are complicated. With that being said, there were a bunch of movements happening behind the scenes. In fact, in my last video about this, we covered how authorities tracked down a key witness across state lines, that witness being Neil Langston, a social media figure who had been seen around David in the past, and was later identified as a potential grand jury witness in this case. And it didn't stop there. According to reports, multiple members of his family, including his father, mother, and brother, were also served grand jury subpoenas, meaning prosecutors were actively trying to get testimony from people close to him. But instead of cooperating immediately, there was pushback. The family challenged those subpoenas, essentially trying to avoid being compelled to testify. However, that effort didn't hold up, and on February 9, a court denied that challenge, which means, as far as we know, they were still required to appear and testify at that time. So when you take a step back and look at everything, this wasn't a situation where nothing was happening. The case was being built slowly, with witness testimonies, legal pressure, and investigators working to connect every piece. And now it reached a point where an arrest has finally been made. But with that comes a lot of questions that I'm kind of asking myself, and I'm sure you're asking yourself these questions as well. What is the extent of David's involvement in all this? We still don't know what that evidence actually looks like. What did investigators find that pushed this case to this point right here? And then there is another layer to this. Was anyone else involved? Because in some of the earlier reporting, there were suggestions that multiple individuals may have been connected to this particular case. And when you think about the nature of the situation, it naturally raises questions about whether there were actually multiple people and multiple moving parts involved. And if that's the case, how do those pieces connect? And beyond that, there's of course the digital side of all this. Phone records, location data, messages. What kind of trail did this situation leave behind? We also know that the Tesla had reportedly been sitting there for an extended period of time, and in that particular area, there was surveillance, which means investigators have already reviewed the footage, tracked movements, and pieced together a timeline of events. So the real question becomes, was David captured in any of that footage? And if so, what exactly does that footage show? Because what I'm personally trying to understand here is, what was the key piece of evidence that led to this arrest? At a stage like this, investigators don't move unless they've built a clear timeline. Who was there, what happened, and when it happened. So whatever they have, it was enough. At this point, his legal team was going to have to respond to whatever evidence they have against him. And depending on what investigators actually found, that could be very challenging for his legal team. Now, I'm not going to sit here and speculate on specifics, but I will say this: whether this situation is bigger than just one person. If that's the case, that's something that will likely come out over time. But beyond all that, the most important thing here is justice for Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Honestly, that's been my focus since day one. And if authorities have taken this step after months of investigation, then clearly they believe they've done the work and justice will be served. Now, the next major movement in this case comes Monday, when everything is presented to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. And that's when we'll find out the truth of what this actually means for David. As of right now, he's being held without bail, and that alone tells you how serious the situation is being treated. And that's what we know so far about the arrest of David in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas. If you made it this far, drop a like and subscribe. If you're new here, my name is Blacky Speaks. Nice to meet you. As y'all can see, this situation is still developing, and I'll be here to keep you guys updated every step of the way. I'll see you guys on Monday. Peace. I'm out.